So whereas Megatron is more of a broad stroke kind of guy, you know, like take out this planet over here, absorb this whole society over here, Tarn is more of a precision instrument, going after specific individuals and inflicting upon them a level of brutality not seen in comics since the Blob turned to cannibalism and ate the Wasp's body in Ultimate Avengers, or the kid-eating Elevator from X-Men Inferno. He's killed, he's maimed, he's impaled, he threw an entire army under the bus, he betrayed not one mentor, but two, and he killed the little baby Jesus! No, I'm lying. I just figured this is the internet, so you guys are used to disinformation by now. This guy's pretty brutal, is what I'm trying to say. I'd love it if you hit like on the video, and let's quickly cover how he came to be the most sadistic con ever, and then we'll do his evil deeds. His early days are shrouded in mystery, but we do know that he came into existence as a being named dhus, a bot with a spark so powerful that its first release of energy kills all in the surrounding area. I am, of course, talking about a 0.1%er. Annoying side thought, if you live in a country of 30 million people, so a relatively small country, for example, 0.1% is still 30,000 people. And then you consider a country like America with 300 million people, my point being that these super powerful beings like Megatron, Tarn, and Overlord might not be as rare as the name implies. So yeah, like bots like Grimlock, Tarn was born with supreme physical strength, which in turn allowed his chassis to support the heaviest armors and weaponry, and not have it be a hindrance to his movement. But on top of all of this, he was born with abilities far beyond the norm for average bots. These outlier bots boast abilities that are totally separate from their alt mode, like Skywarp's ability to teleport or wind charges, magnet hands. Well, dhus could take control of machinery, like non-sentient factory robotics and stuff like that. This would have made him great for spying, hacking servers and communication devices, but also for sabotage. Imagine being able to reprogram targeting systems of missile launchers and such to have all the rockets come back and strike the launcher itself. Anyway, at this stage, dhus was still discovering the extent of his abilities and not in full control of it. At the time, the pre-war Senate hated outliers, and many sought refuge under Senator Shockwave's sheltering wing, who had set up a sort of Professor X-style school where their abilities were both studied and nurtured. Unfortunately for dhus, he didn't end up under Shockwave's protection for long and was discovered by the Senate, who no doubt after a good deal of invasive prodding and poking, his power was deemed weak ass. And as such, he was subjected to Imperator, the process of removing all traces of individuality and leaving them with a security camera for a fucking head. As he explored his ability further, he adopted the nickname Glitch, and word of his ability soon reached the ear of Head of Security Orion Pax, who recruited him for an off-the-books mission to steal a bomb that had been made to look like the Matrix of Leadership. He stuck with Orion Pax for a while, as many outliers did after the Senate discovered Shockwave's school and put him through Imperator as a punishment. Ironically, it was Orion Pax that recommended that Glitch read some writings by a certain philosophical miner turned gladiator called D16, and this was Glitch's first taste of the Decepticon clam chowder. He would work on his ability in secret though, and eventually realized that he no longer needed to touch whatever he was trying to manipulate, controlling objects from afar. It was here that his psychotic streak began to emerge. He once told a story that he crushed an elite guard in a hydraulic press just to test his powers. I'm guessing that he hid the fact that he liked the thrill of the kill here though, because the next thing you know, he was helping Team OP to save a spark field from Sentinel Prime and the Senate. At some point in the following period, dhus turned fully to Decepticonism, although not many details are known about how it actually happened. Perhaps dhus sought out Megatron, enamored by the writings. Yeah, sure, you could come over, I wasn't gonna do much, just smoke a bowl, play some video games, write some stuff about how to take over the galaxy. Or perhaps it was Megs that found him, as it was once said that Megatron corrupted him to hurt someone, although again, no specific details on who that was. My guess would be the one he was trying to hurt was Orion. Turning one of his men against him would have wounded him sorely, and therefore given Megatron a huge dose of the satisfying He marched with Megatron across the planet, burning city after city, carving his way through Autobots and innocents alike as the wave of genocide swept across the planet. He clashed with humongous Autobot Thunderclash, a bot so powerful that even Megatron couldn't kill him, and God knows he tried several times. Thunderclash and dhus' battle ended in a hugely destructive stalemate, and dhus was nearly destroyed in a huge bombardment from the Autobots. It's said that Thunderclash was later shot through the spark. Again, no details on this, but my theory is that dhus went back to finally finish him off and shot him in the back. I don't know, just a theory. The heavily damaged dhus was rebuilt from the ground up by a famous con scientist called Loeb. Ironically, he was most famous for carrying out Imperators, namely shockwaves. But it's not impossible that it was him who carried out the horrific process on dhus whilst at the Institute. Anyway, Loeb's enhancement only gave him yet more physical power. It was at this stage that he adopted a new persona. He decided that he wanted to be the embodiment of the Decepticons' iron will, and that even his face should reflect that. So he forged a mask in the shape of the Cons insignia, and set about inspiring dread and terror in all who laid eyes upon it. Interestingly, he would once say that a secondary purpose of the mask was to hide his closed eyes from his fellow Cons, when he couldn't bear to watch the brutality happening around him, indicating that he wasn't completely lost yet. There was still a small remnant of empathy or even humanity in there somewhere. Anyway, after this, Dhus was put in charge of the notorious grindcore prison, which sounds, for all intents and purposes, like Cybertronian hell. He would encourage guards to torture prisoners. He would arbitrarily pick out prisoners and have them pushed into smelting pools, and then played classical music over their screams. At one point, his favorite toy malfunctioned and he got Skids to fix it, telling him that it was actually a teleportation chamber.
Yeah, it's just a teleportation chamber.
And that as a reward for fixing it, he would free 50 prisoners.
50.
Skids agreed, and only too late did he realize that the 50, including Skids' friend and cellmate Quark, were about to be melted in molten lava. Seeing his friend die in writhing pain put Skids in a state of shock, which Tarn then used to make him abandon his long-held faith in religion and transform a god Primus. Now, why Tarn took it upon himself to break down Skids to such a degree isn't known, perhaps just for the sadistic enjoyment of it all. Megatron was clearly impressed by the job that he did with Grindcore, because he saw fit to give Dhus a special assignment to hunt and make examples of any traitors or turncoats. A good example was Grimlock, who briefly worked with the Cons, but when he went back to the Autobots, Megatron was furious and ordered that his capture and extermination be made top priority. So Dhus started putting together a crew, a team of the most feared and sadistic loyalists, violent murderers, cherry-picked to spread terror through brutality.
Happy, 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 happy.
First up, he needed a pair of enforcers, enormous brutes capable of physically overpowering anyone or anything. There was Tesserus, a bot who gained Dhus' attention when he creatively executed a driller bot called Borbit. Again, no details on the specifics of this, but it's safe to say that it wasn't a quick and easy death. But we do see that Dhus liked a creative spark in his killers, probably as he knew that word of events like this would spread faster, along with the reputation of his new special unit.
Happy, 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 happy.
Tesserus, I'm guessing, had a tank alt mode or perhaps a mobile missile launcher, I'm not sure, but it was the grinder in the center of his chest that made him unique, as well as these shoulder-mounted arms that were more than strong enough to lift a regular-sized bot and slowly feed it into the drum in his chest, a drum adorned with spinning blades that would grind the victim to pieces. It's said that he would rarely actually kill a bot in this manner, instead just taking his legs off as a kind of starter course, as a kind of way of letting the target know, yes, this is really happening, and you ain't got no legs now. But why have one enforcer when you can have two? So Dhus sought out Crucible, who would go on to change his name to Helex, another thunderous brute that transformed into an oven. Yes, a mobile smelting chamber that would encase a target before heating to temperatures hot enough to slowly turn their metal flesh to molten steel. Like Tesserus, he would rarely kill a target in this manner and would often take the victim out of the oven half-cooked, prolonging the pain for as long as possible. Then Dhus needed a comms op, a bot organized enough to maintain an organized plannings and logistics, not to mention a detail and constantly being added to kill list, but also a bot with a mindset suited to the specific rigors and demands of a task force such as this. Also, one who may have ripped out his own eyes. I mean, this is just fan art, but it is possible. So he recruited Kaon, who adopted an electric chair as his alt mode. Now, as we know, Transformers can generate huge amounts of energy as is, but this guy has a massively powerful turbine in his chest, allowing him to pump a bot's nervous system full of electrified pain. You can also blast it out like, Palpatine. Then there was Forstock, who took on the call sign Voss. Another mysterious bot in terms of background, but we do know that he chooses to only speak Old Cybertronian, as used by the ancient ancestors such as the Knights of Cybertron and Ancient Titans. The fact that he only spoke this meant that he was either a bot that felt that the new tongue was a bastardization of the pure form, or another theory is that he hailed from an isolated colony planet that evolved in isolation, with a devout and puritanical worship of Primus to the point of fanaticism. I've spoken a few times before about his favorite method of torture being to remove his face, which, check this out. and use it as a device to carve into his victims' facial features. Lovely. Later, a final member would join, Nickel, and I'm not sure if she's a minicon or not, but she served as a medic and maintenance bot. She had a foul mouth and transformed into this little, I don't know how you describe this, a speedster, let's just say. But mainly, she more than held her own against anyone in the DJD. Wasn't afraid of anything. Once he had his group assembled, Dhus took on the name Tarn in an homage to Megatron's city of birth. His physical and mental power were at an all-time high now, but even though he could now control sentient, strong-minded bots simply with a command from his voice, his powers were still not at their peak, because he found out about a superfuel, this thing called nuke, a stimulant that would enable him to generate even more power. He would bathe himself in the stuff, and eventually became addicted. It meant that he would frequently burn through components, and T-cogs were particularly challenging to replace. So he found a medical facility, being run by an Autobot called Farmer, and bullied him into supplying him with T-cogs from the hospitalized patients, whether they were dead or alive. This dependence on nuke made him insanely volatile, exploding in fits of rage in a millisecond. During this period is when many names were crossed off his list. Among the most famous being Blip, who Tesserus removed his brain module and placed in his mouth while he was still conscious. Tarn then mocked his stutter. His brain's in his... Oh my god. He would later state that he regretted doing this though. When he started talking him to death with his voice of God, Blip asked to look him in the face, and that seemed to wound Tarn somehow. So he stopped talking and threw him to Helix and Tesserus to rip apart instead. Black Shadow was a fearsome Phase 6er whose ununtrium-infused chassis made him pretty much indestructible. He was a one-man army for the cons, but fell afoul of them when he accepted a bribe, and gave intel which resulted in the destruction of a whole fleet of con warships. He was melted by Helix, he was electrocuted by Kaon, and ultimately talked to death by Tarn, who made his spark speed up until it exploded spectacularly. There was also Flywheels, who got shoved headfirst into Tesserus's grinder, and Heretic, also a 1%er who the DJD made short work of under unknown circumstances. The next name on his list was his old mentor and teacher, someone who'd protected him in the early days. That's right, old One Eye himself, Shockwave.
Happy, 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 happy.
The fact that he'd previously protected him made no ends to Tarn though, who hunted him down without even a second thought. And he didn't even waver when Shockwave bartered the lives of his own crew, many of whom were also on the list. Tarn tried talking Shockwave to death over a comms device, but Shockwave was able to blast the radio in the nick of time. Another horrific deed was continuing on his mission even though the Great War had ended, bluntly asserting that his task was over only when Megatron commanded it. They massacred everyone aboard the Lost Light in horrific fashion. Like, check it out, Ratchet's had his eyes gouged out. Not sure who this is, I think this might be Hound. He's had Drift's sword shoved through him. He's had the top of his head cut off, and also Drift is dead. Tailgate got pinned to a wall with a girder, forcing them to transform before their executions, which apparently primed their T-cogs for when the DJD would then carve the T-cogs out of their bodies for harvesting. And I looked up the crew list for the Lost Light. Depending on where in the timeline this happened, could be up to 100 bots, including Sunstreaker, Cyclonus, and even Ultra Magnus, even Overlord actually, chaining him up and cutting his head off with a chainsaw. Thing is, this turned out to be a duplicate copy of the Lost Light that was created in a freak transwarp accident. In an effort to reclaim the transwarp engines of the Lost Light, Tarn ordered that Voss and Kaon be abandoned when they were attacked by the Galactic Council. And later, Tarn nearly beat Tesserus to death for suggesting that this was not the Decepticon thing to do. Roundabout here, Tarn found out that Megatron had given up every principle he lived by and turned to the Autobots. This was a discovery that sent Tarn spinning, spiraling, and he even tried to kill himself by overdosing on the superfuel nuke. From there, he found a new driving force, revenge, and allied with Deathsaurus to kill Megatron and anyone who followed him. He killed the Necrobot, and that's important because this guy was pretty much the Angel of Death and one of the guiding hand, which meant he was one of the first 5 Transformers ever born on Cybertron, someone who recorded the deaths of every Cybertronian. And not only did they kill him, they shoved an energon flower, which symbolizes a soul of the dead, in his mouth. Tarn eventually cornered Megatron, blowing a huge hole in his chest, and beat him senseless, and was about to execute him, but our version of Overlord appeared, demanding to be the one who killed him. The ensuing fight between the two allowed Megatron to escape, and this is where Tarn really started to lose his mind. When Kaon reported that their pet Spark Eater had been taken by the Autobots, Tarn saw in him the compassion that corrupted Megatron, so he took one last deep look into his eye and furiously ripped Kaon's head clean off of his shoulders, and then crushed it against Overlord's chest. Whoopee! In the following battle, Tarn managed to corner Ravage, one of Meg's closest friends, and tore him into 2 pieces. F***ing hell, Ravage really does get abused, doesn't he? Anyway, this led Megatron to abandon his pacifism, and he strutted out, killing many of his former troops. This is where Tarn ordered Deathsaurus to throw all of his troops at Megatron as cannon fodder, knowing that Megatron would kill large numbers of them, but in the hope that the wave would wear him down. And it did, with his fusion cannon eventually failing. This was a pretty hard order for Deathsaurus to follow, as he actually cared about his men. But Tarn didn't give a flying until he suddenly dropped to his knees in an apparent panic. Tarn's army had their final shots reflected as Megatron activated a force field, and Overlord, Deathsaurus, and the other cons left the planet, thinking that Megs was beaten, but Tarn ordered the DJD to breach the force field at any cost. Of course, this was Meg's plan all along.
None of you seem to understand. I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me.
And proceeded to rip them all to pieces using the power of a black hole. As for Tarn, Megatron confronted him with the fact that everything he had done, every horror that he inflicted in the name of the Decepticons, was for nothing, before tearing him to shreds with tendrils of antimatter. His mask would briefly become Megatron's replacement insignia on the center of his chest, before he crushed it under his foot at one point. I find it interesting that Tarn wasn't all completely evil. Like, as I said before, he clearly had a limit on how much atrocity he could actually stomach, and he was obviously highly intelligent, very well read, and cultured even. His real saving grace was the kinship that he formed with Nickel, though, a bot that had watched her peers die at the hands of a Black Bloc consortium. A bot that had the backbone to stand up to him. And he left her a device with a recording of his voice on it, which she used to get out of a certain death situation where she was about to be killed by Scorponok. His feelings towards Nickel, a bot alone and ripped away from her peers, might give us a little insight into why Tarn is the way he is, but I'm going to talk about that a little later. Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot more to speak of, as he is, in the scheme of things, a relatively new character. He has a couple of other cameos here and there, like here he was seen as part of a Unicron cult, and here he was seen hanging out in a drug den. Addictive personality, I guess. As well as here being needlessly cruel to singing contestants in Cybertron's Got Talent. Yeah, this was on the Axiom Nexus Facebook page, you know, way back when Facebook was when Facebook was. But overall, the question that I have is, why did he take it so far? Why did he latch onto Megatron and his ideology with such ferocity? Now, I don't know for sure, but my theory is rooted in a couple of character traits that seem to reoccur. Firstly, there's this thing with drugs. Then there's his need for doctrine. On one hand, fastidiously sticking to the rules as if he needs a framework to operate in. Then latching onto Decepticonism in the way that he does, and his almost religious worship of Megatron. This is one thing that I remember hearing about addiction, and I'm not talking about just narcotics here, but screen addictions, sex addictions, whatever the addiction. It's not just about the drug itself. It's about filling a void in your life. So the way that I see Tarn is that he was a bot that had a bright future ripped away from him, and as a result was left without purpose. And in Megatron's writings he found a trajectory and a way to matter. The Imperator no doubt left him full of anger and resentment. And you throw all that together and you can see how he not only became indoctrinated, but became the embodiment of Decepticon rage. Alright guys, loads more characters to cover. I think next up I might do the weirdest things that Transformers do, because I have a whole list of weird shit that you wouldn't expect the Cybertronians to actually, like bathing. They bathe. There's a whole list of that stuff that I'm going to do next, and I've got loads more stuff. And regardless of how this franchise goes in 2025, there's going to be loads of stuff for you here. So thank you for all of your support this year. Can Megatron Ever Be Forgiven is on the membership section if you want to check that out. And I will see you very soon for the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and cheerio, bye!